Lena Carter's scream never reached the end of Highway 23. By the time the truck driver saw her blue sedan flickering under the streetlights, the road already held its secret, a tangled story of love, betrayal, and obsession buried beneath the eerie glow of blue asphalt. What began as one woman's quiet drive home would unravel into a haunting mystery that pulled Evan Holt and Riley Dean into a chain of violence no one saw coming. In Ridgefield's silence, the truth waited bleeding beneath the surface of the road that never forgets. The night was colder than usual when the first call came in. A truck driver passing through the long stretch of Highway 23 reported seeing a car pulled to the side, its headlights flickering weakly against the fog. The area was known as Blue Asphalt, a name earned because of the strange bluish tint the pavement took on under the streetlights. It was a lonely place, surrounded by tall pines and endless silence. Few people ever traveled there after dark, and those who did drove fast and kept their eyes straight ahead. When officers arrived, their flashlights cut through the darkness and revealed the shape of a blue sedan. The front bumper was dented, the windshield cracked, and the driver's side door hung open. A faint smell of burnt rubber filled the air. Inside the car, slumped over the steering wheel, was a young woman later identified as Lena Carter. Her pale skin was streaked with blood, her hands scratched, her seatbelt still fastened. She was barely conscious, whispering something no one could make out before she fell silent. The passenger seat was stained deep red, and droplets of blood trailed down the dashboard. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but before dawn, Lena was pronounced dead. The doctor said her injuries looked inconsistent with a normal crash. There were no signs she had been wearing her seatbelt too tightly, no broken bones that fit the impact. It seemed as if the wounds had come from something else, something sharp. Detectives returned to the scene before sunrise, examining every inch of the road. There were no skid marks, no glass fragments scattered across the asphalt, and no sign of another vehicle. The only evidence was a faint set of muddy footprints leading into the woods and vanishing after a few steps stopped by morning. The town of Ridgefield was buzzing. Lena Carter wasn't a stranger. She was a local elementary school teacher, kind, quiet, the type of person who volunteered at fundraisers and helped her students plant flowers each spring. People gathered outside the police station, whispering theories about who could have hurt her. Her parents were too shocked to speak, and her co-workers could only describe her as the last person anyone would want to harm. As investigators combed through her background, they found nothing unusual, no criminal history, no debts, no recent threats. But what stood out was her car. The blue sedan was registered only 6 months earlier, recently purchased from a used car lot in town. A mechanic's inspection confirmed it was in perfect condition before that night. That meant the crash wasn't accidental. Someone had staged it or forced it. When the police checked the road cameras along Highway 23, every one of them had gone dark between midnight and 1 a.m. due to a power glitch. It was a strange coincidence, too perfect to ignore. The road seemed to hide its secrets well, and as the first rays of daylight struck the wet surface, the faint blue shimmer of the asphalt looked almost metallic, like it was trying to reflect something it had witnessed but couldn't speak of. It was the beginning of a mystery that would soon unravel every quiet truth the town believed in. The investigation into Lena Carter's death deepened as detectives began piecing together fragments of her life that few people had known about. On the surface, she was an ordinary woman, a schoolteacher who spent her days in classrooms filled with laughter and crayons, someone who walked to work with a thermos of coffee and a gentle smile. But as officers searched her small apartment, they uncovered details that painted a far darker picture. In a drawer beside her bed were several folded notes, all written in red ink, each carrying a short, chilling message. "You can't hide forever. I remember what you did. See you soon." The handwriting was messy, rushed, and filled with anger. None of the envelopes were postmarked, suggesting they had been left somewhere nearby, most likely on her car windshield. As a neighbor later confirmed, detectives traced the notes back to her past relationships. And one name quickly stood out: Evan Holt. He had worked as a local mechanic and had dated Lena for nearly 2 years. Their breakup had been messy, marked by loud arguments and several calls to the police for disturbances, though no charges were ever filed. Evan had a temper and a reputation for holding grudges. When officers visited his home, they found the place in disarray, drawers open, clothes thrown across the floor, the back door unlocked. A neighbor reported seeing Evan leave late the previous night in his old truck, heading in the direction of Highway 23. A search of Evan's garage revealed more. On the concrete floor lay a torn piece of blue fabric soaked in what appeared to be dried blood. Nearby, an unfolded map of Ridgefield showed a red circle drawn precisely around the section of Highway 23 where Lena's car had been found. The evidence looked damning, but without Evan himself, it was impossible to confirm. His disappearance became the next mystery. He had not shown up at work, his phone was switched off, and no transactions appeared on his bank card. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Lena's friends told detectives that she had been anxious in the weeks leading up to her death. She often checked her locks twice before bed and had asked a colleague to walk her to her car after work. She never said why, only that someone was following her again. Police began to suspect Evan was stalking her. Yet something about the timeline didn't fit. The medical examiner found traces of someone else's blood under Lena's fingernails. Blood that wasn't hers and didn't match Evan's DNA from old records. The case was no longer just about a jealous ex. There was another presence, someone unseen who had entered the picture in the last hours of Lena's life. The once simple theory of a revenge killing began to crumble, replaced by the uneasy thought that maybe Lena had stumbled into something larger, something meant to stay hidden. The town's sense of safety vanished overnight. The blue asphalt road was no longer just a quiet stretch of highway. It had become the place where secrets bled into the open. The search for Evan Holt dominated the following days, with helicopters circling over the dense woods surrounding Highway 23. Dozens of officers combed through the undergrowth, marking footprints, broken branches, and any trace of disturbance. The area was cold and damp, a tangle of roots and mist that swallowed sound. On the third day, a search team found a small campsite hidden between 2 large trees. The ashes of a recent fire were still warm. Scattered nearby were food wrappers, a torn sleeping bag, and an empty water bottle. It looked like someone had been living there. One of the investigators noticed a set of boot prints pressed deep into the mud Evans, confirmed by the tread pattern from his work boots. But beside them was something unexpected, a second pair of footprints, smaller and lighter, moving in a different direction. Whoever had been there wasn't alone. The discovery complicated everything. If Evan was on the run, who had been with him? And why did the footprints lead away from the camp toward the river instead of the road? Forensics teams worked quickly, collecting soil samples and testing traces of blood found on a piece of torn cloth near the fire. The results confirmed it wasn't Lena's. The blood belonged to an unknown male. This meant at least 3 people were involved in the events of that night: Lena, Evan, and someone else whose identity remained hidden. Then came an unexpected breakthrough. A fisherman, miles away from the main search area, contacted the police after finding a backpack caught between rocks along the riverbank. Inside were several personal items: a phone, a wallet, and a silver bracelet with the name Riley engraved on it. The phone belonged to Lena, identified by the lock screen photo of her students at a school picnic. But the bracelet was a mystery. No one in her family or circle of friends recognized the name, and her phone showed no contacts saved under Riley. Detectives traced the origin of the bracelet and discovered it had been purchased just 2 months earlier from a local jewelry store. Surveillance footage showed a young man buying it, estimated to be in his early 20s. He paid in cash and wore a mechanic's uniform from a shop called Holtz Auto Repairs. The connection to Evan was immediate and undeniable. Investigators began to suspect that this Riley might have been someone working for Evan, or perhaps someone who knew both Evan and Lena. The theory that Lena's death was part of a love triangle began circulating among the team, but there was little evidence to support it. The medical examiner released new findings. The blood inside Lena's car came from 2 different sources: hers and another male who wasn't Evan Holt. This revelation turned every theory upside down. The woods along Blue Asphalt were searched again, this time deeper, slower, more methodical. Every step uncovered fragments of fear left behind: discarded cigarette butts, a ripped photograph, broken glass. Somewhere among them lay the truth about what really happened that night. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for someone brave enough to listen to the story it refused to let go. The discovery of the bracelet marked a turning point in the investigation. Detectives began focusing on the young man named Riley Dean, the one whose name was etched into the silver. Records showed that Riley had worked as an apprentice at Holtz Auto Repairs for nearly a year. He was 19, quiet, and often described as eager to please. Co-workers said he looked up to Evan Holt like a mentor, always shadowing him in the workshop and helping with after-hours projects. But 3 days before Lena's death, Riley stopped showing up for work. No one had heard from him since. His disappearance had gone unnoticed until now. Officers searched the auto shop for any sign of him. The building smelled of oil and rust, the air heavy with dust. In a small office behind the main garage, they found a locker labeled R. Dean. Inside were his overalls, a set of keys, and a folded note that simply read, "I shouldn't have gotten involved." The handwriting was rushed and shaky, the kind of message written by someone in fear. Investigators began to suspect that Riley had known something about what happened to Lena, or that he had been with her that night. Further searching led them to an abandoned warehouse a mile behind the shop. The floor was covered in tire tracks, and the walls bore streaks of black soot from burned objects. In one corner lay a rag soaked in dried blood, along with a wallet containing Riley's ID. The presence of the rag and the wallet left little doubt that violence had occurred there. Forensics matched the tire tracks to Lena's blue sedan, meaning her car had been there before it ended up on Highway 23. the evidence began forming a grim timeline. Lena might have gone to the warehouse willingly, perhaps believing Riley could help her confront Evan about the threats. Or maybe Evan had lured her there using Riley as bait. Either way, something had gone horribly wrong. Investigators theorized that a struggle took place inside the warehouse, and that Riley may have been injured or worse before Lena tried to escape in her car. That evening, just as the police prepared to widen their search, a hiker stumbled upon a shocking scene deep within the woods. Beneath a tangle of fallen branches lay a man's body, bruised and bloodied, his clothes torn and stained with mud. It was Evan Holt. He had died from a stab wound to the chest. The weapon wasn't found, but clutched tightly in his hand was a broken piece of mirror. Forensic tests later revealed Lena's fingerprints on it, confirming she had fought back. The news spread quickly through Ridgefield. The town's prime suspect was dead, but the case was far from over. Evan's death answered one question and raised 10 more. If Lena had killed him in self-defense, who killed her afterward? And where was Riley Dean? Somewhere between the warehouse and the woods, the final pieces of the story remained buried, waiting for daylight to bring them to the surface. 2 weeks after Evan Holt's body was found, the case seemed to stall. The police had uncovered enough evidence to piece together fragments of what happened, but a complete picture still eluded them. The unanswered question, the one that haunted every investigator, was the whereabouts of Riley Dean. He had vanished as if swallowed by the woods surrounding Highway 23. Search parties continued to comb through the area, using drones, dogs, and thermal scanners, but there was no trace of him. Then, one gray morning, a local farmer called the sheriff's office after noticing a strange odor coming from an old barn on his property. A few miles from the crash site, beneath a rusted metal sheet at the edge of the barn, officers found a shallow grave. The soil was damp and freshly disturbed. When they unearthed it, they discovered the body of a young man in a torn mechanic's uniform. The ID in his pocket confirmed it was Riley Dean. His death was brutal. Head trauma and defensive wounds on his hands suggested a desperate struggle. The discovery shattered any remaining hope that Riley had escaped the chaos alive. The coroner estimated he had died the same night as Lena, which meant all three, Lena, Evan, and Riley, had been caught in the same violent chain of events that unfolded along Blue Asphalt. Detectives reconstructed the timeline as best they could. Phone records showed that Lena had called Riley just after 10 p.m. on the night of her death. It was the last outgoing call from her phone. She had discovered that Evan was following her again, leaving notes and waiting outside her workplace. It appeared she trusted Riley, perhaps believing he could help her reason with Evan, or at least ensure she wasn't alone. Riley likely agreed to meet her at the warehouse, unaware that Evan had already found out. What happened next was pieced together through the physical evidence left behind. Evan must have arrived first, waiting in the shadows. When Lena and Riley showed up, a confrontation broke out. Bloodstains and drag marks inside the warehouse told part of the story. Riley tried to defend her, possibly attacking Evan with a tool or object, but was overpowered. The blow to his head was fatal. Panicked and terrified, Lena fled, got into her car, and sped down the highway. Evan, wounded but still conscious, must have followed her. At some point along Highway 23, she lost control of the vehicle and crashed. Injured and bleeding, she struggled to escape but never made it far. Evan collapsed in the woods soon after, his wound proving fatal. When investigators closed the case, it left the town of Ridgefield hollow with grief. 3 lives intertwined by fear and obsession had ended in tragedy, each driven by choices made in desperation. Locals began avoiding Highway 23, calling it cursed. At night, the road still glows faintly blue under the streetlights. But to those who know its story, that color carries a darker shade, one that whispers of betrayal, terror, and the blood that once stained the blue asphalt forever.